Good morning or afternoon. All right, I know some of you are having issues finding the ineffectiveness of the embargo. So if you go onto page 324, which was in chapter 9, section 3, I believe, as Jefferson responds with an embargo, the president looked for peaceful methods. Now remember, an embargo is forbidding foreign trade, so let's just say that first. Looked for peaceful methods to force Britain and France to respect American neutrality. So neutrality means I'm neither mad or happy with you. I'm just kind of neutral. I'm kind of in the middle. He decided to use an embargo, a government order that forbids foreign trade. In 1807, Congress passed an embargo act. It imposed a total embargo on American ships sailing to any foreign port. Jefferson predicted that both countries would soon cease attacking American ships. So they're not allowing American ships to go outside, which means other places can now or can no longer receive American goods. But again, yes, it's going to hurt our economy in a sense, but at the same time, we have to protect our men that were being seized on those ships, the impressment that was happening. Things did not turn out as Jefferson had expected. Indeed, the big loser proved to be the United States. In just 1 year, American exports fell from $109 million to $25 million. Price of American crops declined, hurting farmers and planters. Tens of thousands of Americans lost their jobs. So you have to kind of understand, like right now we're dealing with China, and China is no longer giving us medication. Or not even that they're not giving us, it's just if we're stopping our trade and our, or having issue with getting those items here, in some ways, we may just stop using a product. Like when I ordered these glasses, it took like a month and a half because the factories were closed or the factories were having issues. But sometimes you'll find a solution. I'll order from an American-made product. So what started to happen is a lot of countries just said, fine, you're not going to sell it to us. We'll go somewhere else. Now, what happens to the American planters are they're still growing the same amount of crops that they would have grown in any typical year. So now they have an overabundance or a surplus of these goods and no one to buy them. So what they have to do is they have to just sell them for what they have. Now, right now, we're doing the complete opposite. Now, we can't even find anything on the shelves. People went the complete opposite and bought everything out. So what you started to see in our culture was price gouging, which meant that say a case of water was typically $5.99, stores started charging $6.99, $7.99. And some of you even brought up to me that if you went online to like Amazon and tried to buy hand sanitizer, people were charging $80, $90, $100 for a bottle of hand sanitizer that you could buy for $5, $3. So when you change the production output or you change the demand or you change how we are getting something, we either have to come up with a solution. For example, people were making their own hand sanitizer. It was not working out well. There was a case in New Jersey where a student, ended up burning themselves because they bought homemade hand sanitizer from a 7-Eleven. So again, the embargo ends up backfiring where now, so what might happen now is we might have an overabundance of things being made, and companies will lose money. Just to kind of supply people. But like right now, I mean, not like you're not going to use your toilet paper. So when all of this comes to an end, I may have, well, not me personally, because I did not buy 4,000 rolls of toilet paper, but people that did will eventually be able to use it. There was one family in Australia that bought like 4,000 rolls of toilet paper, and they ended up like auctioning it off or giving it to people that needed it. I don't even know why I'm going off on this tangent, but okay. So causes of the War of 1812. Tension with Britain was high when James Madison took office in 1809. Americans were angry at Britain for arming Native Americans in the Northwest. Americans also resented the continued impressment of American sailors by the British. So again, we're resenting the British taking our men off of the ships and not giving them back. To most Americans, the country's honor was at stake. They felt a new sense of American nationalism, pride in a country. And again, that's something that we can see right now. We are being forced into a circumstance where we are isolated, we are quarantined, we are all going through this together. So we are trying to be proud. Some of you may have seen people making rainbows for Italy to show solidarity with Italy. So we are showing pride in our own country, but we're also showing like globalized pride by showing support and trying to do things together. So nationalism is something that has been around for a long time. In 1810, two strong nationalists, Henry Clay of Kentucky and John C. Calhoun of South Carolina, became leaders in the House of Reps. Calhoun and their supporters were called war hawks, who were eager for war. And there are some people that are okay with war. There's people that want nothing to do with war because of what the results are. Now, We've talked about this before. When it comes to, joining the military, there are people that are cut out for it. There are people that are not. I don't know if I had it in me. I had always thought about joining the Marine Corps or being in the military until 9/11 happened and there was wartime. The last thing I wanted to do was to be on a battlefield. So I have my father who, when it came down to being in a war, he dropped out of high school. He told his mother he would forge her signature. He wanted to be shot at. Again, different personalities. It's not supposed to be for everyone. As we are all learning, not everybody's supposed to be a teacher. Opposition to the war was strongest in New England. Many New Englanders believed war with Britain would harm American trade. Again, you don't want to upset the people that you're getting a lot of your items from, because then what would happen is you're not going to get those items. And if those are necessities, you are going to have an issue. Relations with Britain worsened steadily in the early months of 1812. In the spring, the British told the United States they would continue impressing sailors. Meanwhile, Native Americans in the Northwest began new attacks on the frontier settlements. In June, Congress declared war on Britain. Early days of the war. So let's see, we got early days of the war, wars in the West, the final battles, and the effects. So early days of the war did not come at a good time for the British, who were still at war with Europe. However, Britain was not willing to meet American demands to avoid war. Providing Native Americans with support was one way of protecting Canada against American invasion. When the war began, Americans were confident that they would win. It soon became apparent that the United States was not prepared for war. Jefferson's spending cuts had weakened American military strength. The Navy had only 16 warships ready for action, and the Army was small with 7,000 men. In the first days of the war, the British set up a blockade of the American coast. The blockade is shutting a port or road to prevent supplies. So if we needed supplies to keep our army or our military going and we can't get them, think of ancient Greece when they did the blockade in Athens. That's going to cut you off from supplies. You're going to be forced to surrender. By 1814, the British Navy had 135 warships blockading American ports. After reinforcing their troops, the British were able to close off all American ports by the war's end. A major sea battle was fought beginning of the war. In August of 1812, the USS Constitution defeated the British warship, the Guerriere. That's a French word, in fierce battle. According to tradition, American sailors named the Constitution Old Ironsides because the British artillery fire bounced off the ship's thick wooden hull. The Americans, it seemed as if the Constitution were made of iron. The war in the West. In the West, the Americans and the British fought for control of the Great Lakes and Mississippi River. Both sides had Native American allies. Allies, again, are friends. Invasion of Canada. Even before the war began, warhawks were demanding an invasion of Canada. They expected Canadians to welcome the chance to throw it off British rule. In July of 1812, American troops under William Hull invaded Canada from Detroit. Hull was unsure of himself, fearing he did not have enough soldiers. He soon retreated. The British commander, General Isaac Brock, took advantage of Hull's confusion. His army of British soldiers and Native Americans quickly surrounded Hull's army and forced it to surrender. The British captured more than 2,000 American soldiers. It was a serious defeat for the United States. American forces had better luck on Lake Erie. Both sides were aware of the importance of controlling the lake. A key 3-hour battle took place in Put-in-Bay, in the western part of the lake, in 1813. During the battle, the American flagship was badly damaged. The American commander, Oliver Hazard Perry, switched to another ship and continued to fight until it was won. Perry announced his victory with a dramatic message: "We have met the enemy, and they are ours." With Americans in control of the lake, the British were forced to leave Detroit and retreat back to Canada. As the British and their Native American allies retreated, the Americans under General William Henry Harrison pursued them. They followed the British into Canada, defeating them in the battle. Tecumseh was popular in the Battle of Timbers that helped with this defeat in the previous section. Conflict in the South. Native Americans also suffered defeat in the South. In the summer of 1813, Creek warriors attacked several Southern American settlements. Andrew Jackson took command of the American forces in Georgia. In March of 1814, Jackson defeated the Creeks of Battle of Horseshoe Bend. The treaty that ended the fighting forced the Creeks to give up millions of acres of land. Final battles. In 1814, British finally defeated Napoleon. This allowed Britain to send many more troops across the Atlantic to fight against the United States. The British attack Washington and Baltimore. The new British strategy was to attack the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. In August of 1814, a British force marched into the city of Dolly Madison, the president's wife, gathered up the president's important papers, and fled the White House. The British set fire to the several government buildings, including the White House. Americans were shocked to learn that their army could not defend Washington. The British now moved to Baltimore. Their first objective was Fort McHenry, which defended the city's harbor. British warships bombarded the fort throughout the night of September 13th, 1814. Francis Scott Key, do we know who he is? A young American watched the attack. At dawn, Key saw the American flag still flying over the fort. The Americans had beaten off the attack. On the back of an envelope, Key wrote the poem that he called the Star-Spangled Banner. It told the story of the Night's Watch. The poem became popular and was set to music in 1931. Congress made it the national anthem of the United States. So Francis Scott Key, the national anthem. The war ends by 1814. Britain had tired of war. Peace talks began in Ghent in Belgium. On Christmas Eve of 1814, two sides signed the Treaty of Ghent, which ended the war. The treaty returned things to the way they had been before. News of the treaty took several weeks to reach the United States in that time. The two sides fought one more battle in January of 1815. American forces under General Andrew Jackson won a stunning victory over the Battle of New Orleans. Protest and peace. From that start, give me 1 second. From the start, there had been opposition in the War of 1812 within the United States. As the war dragged on, Federalist critics of President Madison spoke out and strongly criticizing what they called Mr. Madison's War. New Englanders, in particular, disliked the war mainly because of the blockade had badly damaged New England trade. In December of 1814, a group of Federalists met in Hartford, Connecticut. Some delegates to the Hartford Convention suggested that the New England states secede or withdraw from the United States. While the delegates debated, news of the peace treaty arrived. With the war over, the Hartford Connection quickly ended. Effects of the war, crushed Native American resistance. To some Americans, the War of 1812 was the Second War of Independence. Once and for all, the United States secured its independence from Britain. European nations would now have to treat the young republic with respect. Pride and achievement brought from the confidence to Americans to a new height. Now, Tecumseh, there's a little blurb about him. The Shawnee War chief Tecumseh challenged the tide of white settlement. Tecumseh visited Native Americans from the Great Lakes to Florida, urging them to unite. He was away recruiting when General Harrison defeated the Shawnee at Tippecanoe. After the battle, Tecumseh allied his forces with the British, hoping that a British victory would mean the return of Native American lands. His death at the Battle of Thames dealt a blow to the American resistance. And I think that's it for right now. Effects of the War of 1812, worldwide respect. Again, the effects of War of 1812 is going to give not solid respect, but it's going to kind of show again that the Brits needed to back off, that the Americans would eventually overthrow them. And Native Americans are also going to see that they could fight back, but that the Americans were going to continue to push forward and push west. So I will do a little bit more. I know this was a little wordy, but I'm trying to do story time. Bye.